On this episode of China Unscripted, India has a big role to play when it comes to Taiwan and stopping the CCP's invasion. But will the West help when it's stuck fighting wars from the past? Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
And joining us once again is Professor M.D. Nalapat. He's the director of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at India's Manipal University, as well as vice chair of the Manipal Advanced Research Group. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you.
Well, so, Taiwan pretty recently had their big presidential election, and we wanted to get you on to get the Indian perspective on why Taiwan is important.
Well, actually, the fact is that Taiwan is important because of IT. And I don't mean information technology, I mean India-Taiwan. The fact of the matter is that if you look around your own country, you look around California, for example, look around Texas, any of the locations, New Jersey, any of the locations where you've got software industries, IT, Washington State, etc., you'll find a fair amount of Indians there. I mean, people of Indian origin or actually Indian citizens. You have a large number of Indian citizens working in India for US companies. So tech and India are very closely linked because we have set up a whole chain of technical institutions of various levels of study up to a doctoral level. And so we have a fairly large number of people who are trained in tech, and they do very well across the world. At the same time, hardware has not been our strong point. In microchips, for example, it's not been a strong point. It's been a very weak point for some time. But now with the result of the problem we are facing regarding, supply from China, not only because of arbitrary behavior on the part of the Chinese side, government side, not the suppliers so much, but also because of geopolitical reasons. It's becoming more and more difficult because tech is a dual-use situation. Tech can be used for war and for peace. It can be used in both ways. And from that point of view, I think less and less of democracies are going to rely on Chinese tech because you're never very sure exactly how much is embedded in that particular tech. Taiwanese tech, the Taiwanese have basically been separating from China for quite some time. In fact, from the time they became a democracy, if I may say so, and Di Denghui became the president. Now, the KMT elected Di Denghui as president because they wanted to choose what they call a native Taiwanese. What they basically mean by native Taiwanese is an ethnic Chinese who settled in Taiwan for 2, 3, 4 generations. A mainlander is someone who came ashore, whose family came ashore with Chiang Kai-shek in 1949. So that's the difference. Ethnically, I would say the mainlanders, of course, are a more diverse group. The Taiwanese came from 1 or 2 provinces in China, Fujian, etc. But they're both ethnic Chinese. But, since Li Denghui, since democracy, there's been a flowering of the Taiwanese entity, the Taiwanese identity, if I may say so. And from Li Denghui's time, it is very clear that a lot of people in Taiwan did not buy into the argument that we're ethnic Chinese, so we belong to the PRC. That argument would not work very far in Singapore, for example, where there are a huge amount of ethnic Chinese, the largest single population group in Singapore. And they have basically the say in running of Singapore. They're doing a pretty good job of it from Lee Kuan Yew onwards. But I'd like to say that identity, that change, that from we are all Chinese, I think the KMT also understood that it's not going to go back and reconquer the mainland unless some catastrophe happens in the mainland and the collapse of the PRC. And then if that happens, I don't think it's going to be the KMT that's going to come back and take over. It'll probably be some new, as yet unknown force. So from that point of view, we have seen this develop. And this is the reason why Taiwanese elections have become important. Because for quite some time, if you If you search the internet, you'll find out when I first said it, hopefully. I, long back, I made the argument, and made the argument on the Chinese side as well, frankly, that Taiwan would be a poison pill if you swallow it. The reasoning I had was the Taiwanese people have become now embedded in democracy. It's got into their cultural DNA. Like in India, for example, the Vedic period, the ancient Indian period, the Mughal period, and the Western period, when we were under British colonization. All three periods have become embedded in our DNA. So the Taiwanese democracy has become embedded in the Taiwanese DNA. Even the so-called, they're not so-called, they're very pro-PRC. And some of them really seem to believe that there is a future in being part of the PRC. But even they are different in this generation. Now you have, for example, Ma Ying-jeou, the former president. Now he's as deep blue as they come. Now this is, blue. So if I was appearing on a Taiwanese channel, they'd probably mistake me for a KMT. I'm neither KMT nor DPP nor anything. I'm an Indian citizen. I don't play politics in Taiwan. All the parties are the same to me. But having said that, I'd like to say that Ma Ying-jeou went to China. And after he landed in China, he prayed at the grave of his ancestors, which is an ancient ethnic Chinese tradition. I wouldn't, frankly, a lot of these Chinese traditions have been destroyed by the CCP. We're talking of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, in which he said, yes, fight the olds, fight the five olds, fight this, fight culture, destroy, whatever you find. But the fact is that the Communist Party itself is a cultural revolution where Chinese philosophy and Chinese traditions are concerned. It has made a considerable difference in Chinese culture and Chinese traditions. So much so that even 20 years ago, when I attended a tea ceremony, let's say in Shanghai, which is different from Beijing. Beijing is a completely city of rulers, so to speak. And whether it's Delhi or whether it's Taipei or whether it's Beijing, the capital is always a little bit different from the rest of the country. And you go and do the same thing in Kaohsiung or in Taipei. The authentic Chinese tea ceremony is in Taipei. It's not in Shanghai. So Chinese culture has been heavily infiltrated by the CCP, with the result that even among the very green people, the DPP people who say, no, never unification. Whatever happens to China, we are not going to unify. They have those ethnic Chinese traditions. They have the tea ceremony. They love that, and frankly, so do I, that beautiful music that comes from China and so many other ancient Chinese traditions. At the same time, democracy is embedded in them. So I said, look, you use these guys with yourself, and you're going to get, into your bloodstream, political bloodstream, a whole wave of people who completely and fanatically believe in democracy. And you wait and watch what they're going to do to your system, which is a negation of democracy. It's going to be a poison pill.
It's an interesting point you make about it being a poison pill. Do you think, because Hong Kong has also had a several generations long history of Western rule and later democracy, do you think that the CCP essentially swallowing Hong Kong, which it's done since 2020, is that sort of a poison pill as well? And are we seeing any kind of impact from Hong Kong on the rest of China?
Well, I'd like to say that in Hong Kong, if you go to Hong Kong, after 1997 is when, we're not talking of 2020, when it became very overt. From 1997, Beijing has had control of Hong Kong. Let's be honest about it. They had some freedoms because it was economically suitable or whatever it is. But those very brave people who went and they basically said the same thing what we're saying now, that, Hong Kong it was never a free location. Even under the British, it was never a free colony. You have, the Governor Generals of Britain, even the last chap, he talked a lot about establishing democracy in Hong Kong. It was hardly I mean, people in the elite, people who had money, they had much more influence. You had a rigged electoral system. So, frankly, Hong Kong has never been a democracy. Taiwan is a democracy. Hong Kong had never been a democracy. It was swallowed up by the PRC in 1997. And since then, very gradually, the CCP influence has grown in Hong Kong. The CCP presence has grown in Hong Kong, while the PLA has been there in case the Hong Kong people get the wrong impression that they're still, either that they're a real democracy or that they're not part of China. In 2020, frankly, I mean, Deng Xiaoping gave a solemn promise about one country, two systems. Actually, from not, I wouldn't say Jiang Zemin's time. Jiang Zemin was very, very deferential towards the West. He was like, if I may say so, very deferential towards the West. And for example, he wanted a fusion of Chinese music and Western music. When I used to go there during that particular time, it was horrifying. I mean, it was terrifying, but I was very polite. I couldn't say, my wife also. Both of us found the music horrible. And we didn't dare say it in our room either because we were sure that possibly somebody would be, outside the window or something. And of course, we'll never be bugged by the communists. I mean, they don't do this kind of thing. It's only you Americans who make these allegations. But the fact is the music was horrible. That fusion was horrible. Traditional music is beautiful, but that in the West, it's beautiful. Country rock, for example, and in Taiwan or with ethnic Chinese, it's beautiful. But the fusion is horrible. It actually began from Hu Jintao's time. The Xi Jinping is Hu Jintao on steroids. This whole question of China becoming a technological superpower, the whole question of China overcoming the United States, all that was there during Hu Jintao's time. And I used to basically, listen to dinner table conversations at the party schools and other things and all that. In the provinces, the bigger cities, they know the line, they know the script, they're very careful. Fortunately, I'm a foreigner from India. I'm not a foreigner from Europe or a foreigner from the United States. You have to be much more careful of those foreigners. This guy's in India. I mean, India, what can India do? At that point in time, I think they had that feeling. They don't have it anymore, but they had that feeling. So they were a little more open, and they were very clear that we are going to overtake the United States. That was Hu Jintao's time, second or third year of Hu Jintao's tenure. So it began there. Xi Jinping basically made that overt. As far as Taiwan is concerned, there was an indefinite, no timeline on that, which is a sensible thing to do. But Xi Jinping was in a hurry because he wants to be general secretary of the CCP for life. Now, he gerrymandered a third term, and I think that is the biggest mistake the man has made in his life. And I think the biggest mistake the Communist Party of China made in its life was agreeing to that, because that has basically turned off a lot of individuals within the Communist Party. The fact is, it's a bureaucracy. It's a bureaucracy where the boss likes you, you move up. If the boss dislikes you, you get shoved down. And the same boss, for at least the saving graces, the boss and the sub bosses and the prime bosses and the sub bosses, many of them change over 10 years. So you wait 10 years. Chinese are patient people. Indians also are patient people. Western people are a little less patient, if I may say so. You're given 4-year terms and you put out people at the end of 4 years. But anyway, the point is, very simply, that he moved very fast in ensuring that China became a tech superpower, mostly by stealing technology, mostly. But Xi Jinping made it overt. So what we are calling the big change under Xi Jinping is actually putting on steroids the change already visible under Hu Jintao. The real creator of the China dream was Hu Jintao. The guy who tried to empower China to take on the United States economically. And finally, Africa, Asia, Latin America. And he went back to an old theory of the CCP, a theory that was enunciated by Lin Biao. The cities will be conquered by the villages. The cities are the West. The villages are everybody else, the rest, what you call the West and the rest. And, you know, Mr. Xi, the only point about him was that we are going to be the lords of the city. I don't recall Hu Jintao's people being as explicit that the Han people are, the white people at one time. I mean, they were superior, but actually we are the real master race and we are the true pure race. And the white people will have to give way and we'll come and take over. I don't, I have not really seen, I've seen signs of confidence, but I have not seen that kind of ethnic supremacy in his time. I think that feeling of supremacy was given a huge boost during from the time Xi Jinping became the CCP General Secretary, and possibly he believes it. Now, I happen to believe that ethnically, frankly, it makes no damn difference what you are. You have, for example, Rishi Sunak out there as the Prime Minister of the UK. I'm not entirely sure that you can trace him to the old, if I may say so. The ancestors of people who have been in England for several generations. I don't think so. You have one person standing against Trump, Nikki Haley. She's 100% from the subcontinent, from India, and some people are a bit vulgar. They make fun of her ethnicity. They make fun of her family name. I think family names, ethnicity, are things that nobody should really make fun of. But sometimes politics, you don't become very polite. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the Taiwanese are today completely different from the mainland Chinese. Even if they remove the CCP from power, even if there's a meltdown, a mainlander is going to be different from a Taiwanese, as different as a mainlander was in 1949 from people who had been settled in Taiwan for 2, 3, 4, and more generations. That's my point. Today, there's a fundamental difference, not just in the political system, but in the cultural DNA of the Taiwanese and the ethnic China. Coming back to Ma. What did Ma talk to his ancestors about? He described all that he has done. And then he said, what am I looking at? I'm looking at a unified China under the KMT. I mean, frankly, I don't think the KMT and the CCP shared very good relations with each other. They were had into a forced marriage thanks to the United States armed forces. I mean, General Stilwell and others, Vinegar Joe Stilwell and others, but frankly, they never liked each other. And here is Ma at the grave of his ancestors in China saying that one day we are going to come back and we are going to reclaim the whole of China. And he made that promise to the ancestors. I think from that point of time, the kind of welcome he had in the mainland, I think it dimmed a little bit.
Well, so it sounds like, based on what you're saying, the idea that the Chinese Communist Party puts out about a unification of China and Taiwan basically cannot happen by any other means other than extreme force. Like they will have to break the Taiwanese people.
I absolutely agree for a simple reason that when the CCP takes over a place, it basically takes over the political system. In Hong Kong, you obeyed the rules or you never progressed. Now you had these Hong Kong governments. The first, few years, there was this belief that no, we are different, we are not PRC. After that, the people who led Hong Kong, who were selected to lead Hong Kong, not elected. And I'd like to say that right from, the time of the British, they've been selected mostly. Chris Patten selected many people. I mean, Chris Patten did not introduce democracy in Hong Kong, although, Sir Patten or Lord Patten or whatever he's called now goes around saying that I made Hong Kong a democracy. Sorry, it is no democracy at all. It was as much a democracy as the Governor General wanted it to be. But it's as much a democracy as the CCP wants it to be, which is zero. At least the British made Hong Kong their 20% democracy. Taiwan is now 100% democracy. That's the difference. Singapore maybe 60%. I mean, you have Thailand, you have Vietnam, you have the Philippines, you have different countries where you have a large ethnic Chinese population. Taiwan is a completely 100% democracy. The CCP will dismantle that immediately. There's no way of doing that except by brute force. So you're perfectly right. Anybody who's got a delusion of peaceful unification is basically saying, I'm perfectly happy to be what the Chinese are in China, completely under the control of the party machine.
So, since you mentioned earlier that India's not so strong on the hardware side, the entire world depends on like these semiconductors that Taiwan is making, and the Chinese Communist Party has made very clear that they want to develop their technology, but they can only do that through stealing. What does it mean if the Chinese Communist Party is able to take over Taiwan's tech hardware?
It's not going to happen. For the simple reason that tech hardware is about 15 jumbo jets taking off from Taipei and landing somewhere else. It's brain power. It's not hardware. The hardware is what is made by brain power. Frankly, if you get a lot of, you have a lot of Indian software engineers who have been very active in creating the kind of thing, not so much in Taiwan, but over the last 7 or 8 years now, there's a significant and a rising curve of Indian techies in Taiwan. A very rising and significant curve of Indian techies. So frankly, it's about a little more than a dozen, maybe 20 jumbo jets, and that's your tech. The Chinese, frankly, the Communist Party, the Soviet Party was smarter. They had these little bubbles where you had these scientists. The scientists operate as though they're in America. They would even bash Brezhnev in public and say, "Oh, these guys are idiots." Then the local party secretary would be called a dolt to his face. They allowed all that because the scientists think freely, and if they don't think freely, they don't get. Frankly, under Xi Jinping, in my view, innovation in China is now slowly getting snuffed out because it's to have a free mind in China. Free mind is contagious. A controlled mind is much less contagious. A free mind is contagious. And so he doesn't want a free mind anywhere. And I think, therefore, you'll find that what tech is there in China is basically Taiwanese in China, willingly or unwillingly, and stolen tech. And of course, if I may say so, people who are more loyal to CCP than they are to their passports, working in different countries of the world who are involved in tech. Fortunately, not a very large number. More and more people are getting turned away from PRC because of the CCP. More and more are. But you do have some people who have bought into this idea of the Han supremacy or whatever you call it. But frankly, I'm not worried about that happening. And I don't believe that Taiwanese tech, if it were to be, God forbid, I don't think it's ever going to happen. There may be a fight, there may be an invasion, but I think the Taiwanese will prevail. But if, God forbid, they don't prevail, that tech industry is going to migrate. And that is one, I'll tell you, that's why, for example, TSMC, I'm very certain it's going to come to India. One of the reasons is very clear. We have a border with China. We also have nuclear weapons. They can incinerate Delhi, we will incinerate Beijing, and we will incinerate Shanghai as well. And we have enough left over to incinerate China 5 times over. So the prospect of anything other than a border skirmish between India and China is, I think, a little unreal. 2 nuclear powers fighting each other, it doesn't happen unless NATO and Russia go to war with each other. And you'll recall, I've been very skeptical of the Ukraine war for quite some time. But I remember when I first appeared in the channel also, I made some very skeptical remarks about this Western response to Ukraine. And I said, this is crazy. It's not going to succeed. We know Russians very well. In fact, if I may say so, on the 27th of February, 28th of February, there's going to be a major India-Russia track 2 bilateral in a very important city in India. And on the Indian side, I would say I'm a key organizer of that, possibly whatever. But and on the Russian side, we have individuals who are in think tanks that are very close to the Kremlin. And we are both organizing it because the Russians are still our good friends. We have multiplied trade with Russia. No sanctions were put on India. Frankly, there is stealth sanctions. For example, the EU, you've got certain, they tell universities you can have projects with XXX country, and suddenly India is missing from the list. The largest population in the world, the largest democracy in the world, the largest number of frankly educated people in a democracy. It's missing because they have this little stealth sanction, Victoria Nuland kind of sanctions, in which there was a time when it took 3 years or 4 years for an Indian to get a visa to go to the US, and a Chinese could get a visa in 3 or 4 days. So I'd like to say that yes, they will have to change the mindset. And in my view, it's going to be brutal. Those who they believe cannot be re-educated are going to land up in concentration camps, and many of them will end up the way Alexei Navalny has ended up. Now, as I said, India and Russia are good friends. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin are good friends. And frankly, that friendship was very helpful, as well as our outreach to Zelensky in ensuring that our Indian students came back. And Arab students, Pakistani students, Bangladeshi students, Vietnam, all kinds of students came back waving the Indian flag because of the good relations that we have with Russia. And the fact that Ukrainians don't want to, in a sense, go on our wrong side. We are still very friendly with them. Like we're very friendly with Damascus, with Bashar Assad. We were very friendly with Bashar. We are very friendly with him. And we have got that. So tomorrow there's a problem somewhere in Yemen. I mean, some of these bad actors there. There was a time when we wanted to extricate the Indians from there. And these people who are bad actors in the Red Sea, frankly, we are totally opposed to that. And our Navy defends our interests there. But these very people ensured that all the Indians left safely. So we have a fairly good relationship. We have a good relationship with Iran. We have an excellent relationship with Israel. We have very good relations with Russia, despite some of the people in the Biden camp who believe that America is a corner of Europe that's been just floated across the Atlantic. We still have very good relations with the United States, and they're growing every month. They're growing exponentially. In security, in defense, a lot of it is not very public, but it's there. If a Republican government comes, I'll be frank with you, it'll be 10 times better.
Well, you make a good point about India's unique alliances around the world. I'm curious, how does India balance the fact that Russia also has this relationship with China, especially moving forward if there's a conflict between India and China over the border, Taiwan? How do you handle the fact that Russia also has this relationship with China, which is India's enemy?
Like, which side is Russia going to pick? Is that kind of what you're wondering?
Kind of.
Well, in my view, I may be totally wrong. I don't think the Russians are particularly in awe of the Chinese.
Definitely not.
Pushed in a corner. And I think one reason why it's important that India and Russia, dosti, which is called friendship, continue, is that the Russians believe that there is still an alternative to China. And one day, these idiotic people in the West will also come around to the view that Russia can do what China did. It stabbed the Soviet Union in the back. Now, it's crazy in Cold War 2.0 to basically, antagonize Russia and push it into China's camp. You're helping your worst enemy. I don't understand Western strategic thinkers, frankly. And this big chasing of Ukraine, I said from the beginning, the West is going to lose the rest because of this obsession with European power Ukraine. There are people who are suffering in Yemen and other places. Look at this aid bill, for example. I mean, as someone who has basically stood by a strong India-US relationship, I've been called, many things. I'm disgusted that Joe Biden believes that Ukraine deserves 60 billion, Taiwan deserves pennies, and Israel, of course, deserves, again, nothing compared to what Ukraine is getting. It is disgusting. And it solidifies the belief when you look at the travel schedules of Blinken and Sullivan and all these guys. 80% of their travel was transatlantic. 80% of their mind space is Europe, So, frankly, we are very clear that we are going to, one of the important points behind this particular bilateral is the track to bilateral. Government has nothing to do with it, but you have influential people, coming in on both sides. People whose thinking, I think, has an impact on the leaderships of both countries, is to show the Russians you're not alone, brother. You don't have to, think that you're being fed to the Chinese. We are there, and we don't like the CCP at all. And we are the only country that has actually shed blood at the PLA and shed PLA blood. Our calculation is that they lost about 60 people. We lost 20. We admitted that. They finally admitted about 8 or 9. But they lost 60. We got satellite things of that. So we are the only two armies that have shed blood. And we are ready to shed blood any time. The Indian soldier is waiting for an opportunity to confront the Chinese soldier. The Indian Air Force is waiting. The Indian Navy is waiting. The Navy is all over the Indo-Pacific. The Air Force is very active. We have a lot of Air Force activity on the India-China border. We have a lot of military activity there. And Mr. Xi Jinping is going to find out that if he comes to India and invades India, that's, for our point of view, we'll find out who's the better soldier. A single child of parents who are single, or the Indian soldier who comes from a rough background, who has seen his family suffer. Some have died of disease or poverty. The kind of soldier Mao's PLA was. That's the kind of soldier we have. And Xi Jinping's soldiers, frankly, are marshmallows compared to Mao's soldiers. And in other words, they are marshmallows compared to our soldiers. That's why I've been saying we don't want ground troops. We want US Air Force. We want US Navy to help us, intelligence, equipment. That's what we want. I mean, what you guys are, you're doing in Ukraine. You're not sending, of course, you've got people there who are training. And that happened in Vietnam. Frankly, it's a pretty dangerous slope. We don't want any of that. We don't need training. Our training is entirely different. But we are having a lot of co-working with NATO militaries. And I think we are co-working extremely well with our own tactics, our own training, our own mindsets, our own culture. So as far as Taiwan is concerned, I'd like to say, first of all, invading and occupying is not going to be easy. This election proves it.
Well, I wanted to ask about, Ukraine and Taiwan. And one of the points that you make a very different point about Ukraine than other people who've been on our show. For example, we had former Air Force General Teckert on our show a few weeks ago, and he was arguing that the justification for the U.S. supporting Ukraine is to show on the global stage that the U.S. will defend countries against attacks by a larger country. And it's important with respect to deterring the CCP from invading Taiwan, right? That's his perspective. And I've definitely heard that perspective from many other people in the United States. I understand that you don't think that that's necessary. And perhaps you have another view on the ramifications of that and also how to deter a CCP invasion.
Look, Chinese have basically invaded and occupied Taiwanese airspace. They have invaded and occupied Taiwanese cyberspace. They have invaded and occupied in very many ways in a hybrid war. What has the United States done about it? Nothing. What is the kind of equipment you're selling Taiwan? Equipment that is even 20 years ago was not modern. What is the kind of assistance you're providing Taiwan in terms of equipment given virtually free of cost? Nothing. Taiwanese are paying top dollar. We are paying top dollar, by the way. We are a democracy that's confronting nearly 300,000 troops, confronting about 400,000 Chinese troops. What have you given us the way you've given Ukraine? Nothing. Every nut and bolt is paid for. And Donald Trump, in fact, wanted more payment. Frankly, Biden is more reasonable. He asked for the normal payment. But US defense contractors want a lot of money, and they get it from India. Now, what are you doing? Where is this big fight for democracies? And you think Ukraine was a democracy? I mean, frankly, I know Ukraine pretty well. I know Russia very well. They are both very similar in terms of democracy. Let's be honest about it.
What percentage democracy is Ukraine?
I don't believe that Ukraine is a democracy. And to the extent it was a democracy, Zelensky came to power on a peace platform, number one. Number two, Ukraine is important because the Europeans are completely obsessed with themselves. They can't accept the fact the world has moved to Asia. It's no longer Europe. It's no longer the Atlantic. It's the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese hate the term Indo-Pacific. The Russians have now started using it, frankly, by the way, Indo-Pacific. They hate that term because India, what is India? It's us, So you have the Asia Pacific and the Chinese CCP definition of Asia themselves. One day they'll be all over Asia, like the British were all over the world. They'll have that red map all over Asia. So frankly, this is an argument which is delusional. And it is done by people who have served too long in NATO. Because NATO is completely Cold War 1.0 construct. It has not graduated to Cold War 2.0, nor can it, because its methods, its tactics is all to fight the previous war. And you know what happens to a military that tries to fight the previous war? It ends up the way the French military ended up in the Second World War, frankly. So we don't want, frankly, generals telling us about field tactics, etc. We are very much into Cold War 2.0. We are the front line of defense. Taiwan is the front line of defense. Compared to what the generals have been talking about, Ukraine. Secondly, the Ukraine example. Hands up, everybody who is perfectly okay with New York or Miami or Chicago or Denver ending up the way Ukrainian cities have ended up. Hands up, everybody. I don't see any hand up. My hand is certainly not. I'm in Bangalore today. I don't want Bangalore to be looking like like Kiev. The Russians can flatten Kiev anytime. Who gave this absurd story they want to take it over in 3 days? And in Bucha, you think the Russians are so stupid that they leave bodies all over the street for Ukrainians to find? It's absurd. But the West seems to have got into a kind of a delusional love affair with Ukraine. And in that process, I'd like to say, I think the Taiwanese people are beginning to realize these guys, frankly, they're racist. For the first time in a long time, the perception that Americans with European ethnic roots are racist has come out in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And for the first time, people in Taiwan are saying, I don't want to be like Ukraine. And 40% of people in Taiwan voted for the DPP on the clear understanding by the CCP, you will be another Ukraine. The CCP propaganda machine is saying exactly what this general was saying. You will be the next Ukraine. 40%, only 40% voted for them. It could have been 70, 80%, but for the fear factor. 40% voted for them and said, damn it, we don't mind. We'll fight. We'll have our cities destroyed. We'll have our lives gone. We'll strap, whatever it's called, these mobile missiles that you can shoot off, from your shoulder fire, or, you strap around this thing. We'll do it. 40% voted for DPP. Under two candidates, one of whom is half Western. Her mother, Bi Kim Shao, is English. Her father is Taiwanese. And William Lai has made no secret of the fact that he absolutely loathes communist China. He's completely opposed to CCP, completely opposed to any unification of the PRC. Even if PRC becomes a better democracy than United States, let's say, or India, he says, no, I'm Taiwanese. I'll remain Taiwanese. Good, you're a democracy, we'd love that. But I'm Taiwanese. You have these two candidates. And the Chinese propaganda was, if they come to power, we'll have immediate war, immediate invasion. 40% of Chinese said, or Taiwanese said, because they're all ethnic Chinese, I use that term interchangeably. And for me, the Chinese people are much more important than the CCP is the Chinese people. We are Indians. We love and respect the Chinese people. We have a relationship going back 5,000-6,000 years with the Chinese people. But what I'm trying to tell you is, it's a horror story, Ukraine. Anyone who is not delusional will understand that. Nobody wants to see what's happening in Ukraine. 2 years ago, I think on your show also, I made it clear, Ukraine is going to be smashed. You're not going to deter Putin. Putin is not going to go away. He's not going to suddenly disappear. There's not going to be a revolt against them. Russian economy is not going to suffer. They're going to become much more on defense. Everything has happened. The ruble is stronger today than it was before February 2022. Everything has happened. The dollar has become a very shaky currency because you have gone and weaponized the dollar. So people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, they're beginning to believe tomorrow it may be our country that some stupid politician or general says is an enemy. And, all the money in Western banks take it over. Nobody wants that, frankly. It is killing your currency. And you did it. So you're played into the Chinese game. Ukraine, I can tell you, was tailor-built for China. The Hamas attack was tailor-built for China. And the way the Hamas people had intel on what is happening on the Israeli side, the way social media was used to persuade young Israelis in particular that Israel is perfectly safe now, that Gaza at least will not have a problem. The main problem is the West Bank. This is rubbish, by the way. Absolute rubbish. Anyone who's been to both sides will know. Hamas, from I would say not day one, but let's say day 90 or day 93 or something, they started indoctrinating the young people there. Their textbooks said that the Jewish people are devils, demons. The way Pakistani textbooks say Hindus are devils, demons. The Jewish people are horrible, and we are going to remove them. We're going to exterminate them. You remember somebody in 1920s Germany who said the same thing. That's what Hamas is. And today,
so China is taking advantage of this global chaos, is what you're saying.
Partly caused it. A lot of that social media in Israel, in India, in the United States is manufactured by CCP strategic psycho warriors.
So not just taking advantage of it, but actually causing it.
I don't believe Hamas would have had the intel needed to mount that successful attack. I don't think Israel, the IDF would have had the feeling that Hamas was not a danger, but for complete dissemination in social media of very misleading misinformation and messaging about both Hamas and about the Jewish people, the young people in Gaza, and that has spread. Gaza and West Bank keep moving each other. I mean, they are taught that the Jews are an evil people. You see that in your textbooks. And then you have Benjamin Netanyahu saying, oh, this is okay, I can live with these guys. You could have expected this. I mean, I'm surprised that Netanyahu didn't expect it. I'm surprised that Mossad didn't warn him. And I've seen this happen. I've seen this happen in so many countries. When you have intel officers on the ground who are giving accurate information, it's not what the bosses want to hear. If the general is told that Ukraine is actually a horror story for Taiwan, if he's the intel chief, the head of military intelligence in the US, he'll make sure, those down below will make sure that kind of intel never makes it up the chain of command. He'll stuff it out. And that's what's happened in the West. You are living in a collective delusion about an old world Cold War, a collective delusion about the CCP, that you can bring it, and make friends with it, and a delusion about Russia. Russians fundamentally regard themselves as the European people. We are now happy. As a consequence of the Ukraine war, they now call themselves Eurasians. Thank God. You've done that for us. We are grateful to you for that. But believe me, it's a horror story in Taiwan. Nobody wants to be the next Ukraine. But 40% of Taiwanese voted for number one. Number two, 26% of people voted for Ko Wen-je. And what did Ko Wen-je say? I am a smart guy. And he's a brilliant fellow, I can tell you that. I know him. I met him. I have enormous respect for the guy. He's an amazing chap. And he said, I'm a smart guy. I'll keep peace. I'm not going to fight with these guys the way the KMT is, the way the DPP is doing. I'll keep the peace. So you had 40 plus 26. How much does that become? Tell me, in mathematics.
66%, right? 2/3.
Inside the KMT, virtually everybody said, we will handle the Chinese. You had a KMT candidate who was a native Taiwanese. And what happened? Uncle Xi defeated him. Frankly, it would have been, had they left the native, like Li Denghui, had it become a contest of native Taiwanese versus native Taiwanese, I think the peace factor and the fear factor would have probably given the KMT an edge over the DPP. The fear factor is an important factor in any and that factor would have given them an edge. But the fact is, this candidate, the mayor of New Taipei City, this poor chap, Mayor Hao, on one side, his vice president was hardcore mainlander, as dark blue as dark can be. The candidate number one of the KMT list, hardcore mainlander. He lost the election. He was recalled as the provincial head, as the head of that province, recalled because he was seen as he acknowledged. He says, "I'm Chinese." So Mayor Han was recalled. He's number one. He's become the speaker. And what if you have a speaker and there was a KMT majority in the lower house, which could have happened if the Uncle Xi had not intervened and got two hardcore mainlanders squeezing this poor native Taiwanese New Taipei City mayor, and frankly, making enough Taiwanese react who don't want anything to do with the CCP or with China. That is why, in fact, the KMT did so badly. Whereas, on the other hand, William Lai did well because of his choice of vice president. One thing that is a masterly choice, Bi-khim Xiao. Because Bi-khim, on her telephone, she can basically pick up and dial a hell of a lot of influential people in NATO, in the US. She's got credibility. If Biden is hesitating to help Taiwan, she can go over Biden's head and address people and say, "Look, here I am. We need your help." Like Tsai Ing-wen can, for example. And choosing her made that 40%. I think it would have been 15% less. If it just William Lai and some other person who's also like William Lai, Bi-khim Xiao was regarded as almost a Westerner. And she gave confidence that the West will stand by Taiwan. And that was very important in giving them that 40% of fearless Taiwanese. That 40%, I can tell you, shows that Taiwan, in the words of Mao Zedong, the Taiwanese people have stood up. They have stood up for freedom. They have stood up and are ready to fight tyranny. 26% of them, absolutely. Mayor Kerr is definitely no CCP man. He's definitely not a votary at all of unification. As I said, I have had the privilege of meeting him. I know all three party leaders well. Frankly, I never met William Lai so far, but I know Bi-khim very well. I know Dr. Tsai very well. I presume next time I go to Taiwan, I will be meeting Dr. Lai before hopefully he takes over. I would like to go there, but I haven't met him. But other two I've met frequently, and none of them, as Mayor Hao, Mayor Kerr, none of them want anything to do with unification. None of them. As for Ma wants unification under the KMT. He doesn't want unification under the CCP. So he's not the demon, frankly, that he's portrayed to be. Frankly, I know the guy very well. I was the first visitor Ma Ying-jeou met officially when he was sworn in as president. I was the last foreign visitor to meet him on the last day of his presidency. So I have a sentimental attachment I got a very big attachment to Dr. Tsai also, because I think, I was a host in India, and all of us were struck by her. Her commitment to democracy, her commitment to freedom, and her commitment in her own party. Her biggest critic in the party, the guy who resigned the prime ministership to fight against her and replace her, big mistake in my view, she made him the vice presidential candidate. What better symbol of democracy can be than that? William Lai opposed Dr. Tsai. He fought against her, didn't want a second term for her. He resigned as prime minister to fight the DPP election. It weakened the DPP, but she made him the vice presidential candidate. Her vice president. So that is democracy, and that is the Taiwanese people. So I'd like to say very frankly, Uncle Xi, frankly, is not going to, in Taiwan, I would like to say a rough mathematical guess, at most about 5 or 6% are in favor of unification, given the current ceteris paribus, as things are. Given that, about maybe 5 or 6%.
You mentioned earlier that Indian soldiers are not marshmallows. With the West perhaps being in decline, is it possible for India to become a major military power in the Indo-Pacific, particularly if China invades Taiwan? India as a democratic military power.
Well, I'd like to say that if Biden's diplomacy were a little smarter, I think conversations must be taking place. Now, frankly, I have no connection with anybody in the Indian government, quite frankly. Yes, I have been the main organizer for this India-Russia. There's a track two thing, government is not involved. But I'm sure that conversations have taken place about that. And what our Navy can do, if the Chinese blockade Taiwan, our Navy can ensure that no Chinese ship ever crosses the Red Sea. We can do a far better job than the Houthis ever will. And by the way, Houthis have made it very clear, no Russian ships, no Chinese ships, no Indian ships. They have specifically exempted us also. And that includes Indian cargo now. So, frankly, we are the three little countries that are exempt from this Houthi embargo because we've got very good relations with the Shia, for example, Iran and all that. The only country that's suffering Shia terror is Israel. And that was because of the mistake made by Ariel Sharon in the 1980s to go on the side of the Maronite Christians against the Muslim Shiites. I think there's no point getting involved in a religious tension in Lebanon, and he jumped into it and he took one side. And so the only country where you got active Shia terror, and that's why I can't blame Israel for being totally opposed to Iran, is Israel. Now, we don't want to follow Israel's example. We are very friendly with them, thank you. And we have got Wahhabi terror. We don't want Khomeini's terror. Khomeini's terror is way more virulent than Wahhabi terror, frankly. And I have come in close contact with both. I think Khomeini's terror, and Khomeinism is not Shia. Wahhabism is not Sunni Islam. There's a big difference. You look at the UAE. The Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, who's being demonized in the New York Times and Washington Post and the Guardian and the Deutsche Welle and CNN and VOA and BBC as anti-Muslim, and the Muslim world is absolutely, detests him. For God's sake, he was received as a brother in Abu Dhabi. He inaugurated a giant temple in Abu Dhabi, a temple built across the same stone architecture of our temples of 4,000 years ago. And he was embraced by the Sheikh. And guess what's coming up in Ayodhya when the Ram temple, everybody mentions about the mosque being demolished. And they say, oh, these fellows went and demolished. Two things. One, a few kilometers from there, a magnificent new mosque is going to come up. And I'm very certain that you're going to have some very important people in countries that are majority Muslim attending that particular ceremony. A very magnificent mosque is going to come up. What is being demanded, what is being requested is three holy sites. It's the Makkah, Medina, and Al-Aqsa of the Hindus. Kashi, Mathura, and Ayodhya. You can't change them. Kashi was where Lord Shiva manifested and gave the Kashi Vishwanath temple its original lingam, that the stone carving, which is representational of the power of Shiva. Mathura was where Lord Krishna was born, the birthplace. You can't change a birthplace, right? I can't change my birthplace. Now somebody else is there in it. I can't change that. You can't change the birthplace of Lord Ram. But according to Western, people, these are all mythic. Anything that goes back in time, 1,000 years, it's all myth. It doesn't exist. You don't say that for the Greeks. You don't say that for Romans. You don't say that for Chinese. You say that for Indians. Why? It's not myth. It's a fact. There is Lord Ram. He's there in our minds. And there was a birthplace. Otherwise, nothing more. So my point is, the world is changing around you. Let's not live in... And so far as Taiwan has come, Taiwan is changed. And believe me, I can tell you, the Ukrainian example, and a lot of these generals go to Taiwan and say, don't worry, you'll be the next Ukraine. And believe me, that cost the DPP 1% more vote. Each time that happens. It's a disaster. Ukraine is a horror story, and Taiwan doesn't want to be a horror story. There are very smart people out there. And believe me, I can tell you, we don't want to see the Chinese take over Taiwan. No way. apart from the fact that we want TSMC to come and we want a very high-tech IT. India, Taiwan, we don't want IC, integrated, India and China. We cannot integrate India and communist China. We want IT. But I'm sure that discussions are going on as to how, but I must say that Biden has been extremely unhelpful by some of the lefties in his cabinet. You have people like Ilhan Omar, whom I went long back when she was elected. I said she's a gift to the Republican Party. And she is. The way she talks about Israel and the Jewish people, it's absurd. And Hamas, who gave Hamas the confidence? The confidence they had was if you take so many hostages, nothing will happen to you. IDF, it's ridiculous. I said on television at that time, yes, there are so many hostages, but believe me, the IDF is going to go in and make sure the military wing of Hamas, I never said Hamas, the military wing of Hamas, it's eliminated. That is going to be their prime concern. And the IDF is doing it. It's a magnificent fighting force. As for the Jewish people, they have been through hell and back several times over the last thousands of years. When somebody confronts them hell, this time they're fighting back. There's not going to be another Holocaust, I can tell you. And in Gaza, your textbooks are exactly similar to textbooks that if you read in the original Deutsch, the original German, and ich habe, little bit, sehr wenig Deutsch, ich kann sehr wenig Deutsch sprechen. It's horrifying. The same thing. It's almost, translations. So, sorry, go ahead. As far as Taiwan is concerned, we are not keen on seeing the Chinese Communist Party empowered by taking over Taiwan. I'm sure that there are systems in place to ensure that the Indian defense equip that we have, including cybersecurity, etc., I'm sure that we are working with the Taiwanese on various fronts. But what those fronts are, being outside government, I don't know, frankly.
You mentioned earlier that the West is kind of in this Cold War 1.0 delusion. What do you think is needed to kind of break that delusion in the West?
Frankly, I don't see it happening. It's getting worse and worse. What you call wokeism, for example, is basically living in an alternate reality in which the bad guy is the good guy. And some of us predicted this. I have a good research team with me. And my research team dug up a lot of things that not only does the CCP propaganda make you feel the Chinese Communist Party can be made harmless, you can diffuse the fuse, but your country is horrible. Your people are horrible. So they make you fight. And if you check online, you'll find multiple speeches of mine, maybe some writings as well, saying about how the fringe is empowered. There are certain research that I can't really, talk about because my researchers will not like it. But, it's getting worse and worse in the West, to the extent to which we're getting worried about the West as a security partner. And I again repeat, I don't think anybody wants a Western soldier on the ground anywhere. In Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Afghanistan, everywhere. They've been what PLA soldiers are. Thank God for the PLA soldier. They can't fight. Let's be honest. But technology is great. Intelligence is great. Your Air Force is great. Your airmen actually got different. Your Navy guys have got different things. The Army is basically about force protection. And let me tell you, unless you're prepared to enter a live battlefield, an active battlefield, and ready to lose your life, you're not really a soldier. And you're not somebody who's an analyst either. Whether it's a terror battlefield or it's an actual battlefield, unless you enter there and you're willing to risk a bullet or a bomb or a knife thrust or whatever, a bayonet, you're not really understand what battle is all about. The Chinese soldier doesn't know what battle is all about. The Taiwanese don't know what battle is all about. Neither of them, in my view, are equipped to fight a real war the way we are, frankly. But the Taiwanese are very good at cyber. Over the last 8 years, they have done a tremendous amount of work. I'm happy, at least for the next 4 years, that's going to continue. And for the next 4 years, I think under Lai and under BKIM, they're going to really cybercharge their cybersecurity. They're going to multiply their defenses. The only problem is you have these weak, vacillating, untrustworthy, unreliable people in the West who flood Ukraine with equipment to defeat a power that's already gone. In the and you have the same people niggardly. I mean, I don't want to use that word. So utterly stingy. I apologize for using that word, frankly. I'd like to say that, we in India, we have stood by, for example, the ANC, we have stood by the cause of racial this thing. But that's a word which has been commonly used to mean something, I mean, frankly, it's a contemptuous amount of help that you're giving Taiwan compared to what you're giving to Ukraine. It's contemptible. It's those who have, planned that budget are contemptible people. Those who have planned that budget and given Israel this much, when Israel is in the battle of its life, when Israel is fighting a battle of existence, and finally they realize that. I mean, they never realized that about Gaza. Some of us warned some of our friends that this is happening. For God's sake, these guys are 100 times more virulent. Don't think it's the West Bank, it's Gaza. Oh, well, we can tackle that. But anyway, forget that. What are we giving Israel? Nothing. Compared to what you're doing to Ukraine, $60 billion. You cut that money, make it 10 billion, 20 billion, 40 billion you use to defend your southern border. You have to defend your southern border because God alone knows how many people are coming in from CCP, from Wahhabism, from Khomeinis. All three will be coming in. Maybe 1 in 20, maybe 1 in 50. But even 1 in 1,000 is too much. So spend 40 billion on defending the southern border. I mean, Donald Trump says, build a wall, build a barrier. Yes, please. And why? The only difference I got with Nikki Haley, she's completely, I think either for winning the elections or not, she's become totally Ukraine. Ukraine conflict is about democracy, civilization. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Was France not a democracy, or Britain or America or, New Zealand? Ukraine, I mean, was part of the Soviet Union. What happened? If Ukraine is so central to democracy in the world, why wasn't democracy affected when it was part of the USSR? How is democracy affected now when about a fifth of it is now in Russian control? And unless it's taken back, democracy will collapse. Is your democracy so fragile? If Taiwan is taken over, believe me, nobody will believe in the West. As it is, after seeing this ignominious retreat from Afghanistan, after seeing the Kurds go under the bus, after seeing people, who have stood by you in Afghanistan being executed by Taliban. By the way, India has very good relationships with individual Taliban people. More than half of them send their families to India to either live securely or study here. And we have no problem with that. Northern Alliance people send, Taliban send, they don't fight each other, but we have a very flourishing Afghan community, and Indians are quite safe in Afghanistan. We have no problem with Taliban, but Taliban is certainly not a pro-Western power. It's a Wahhabi power. It's an existential danger to moderate Islam. And the greatest thing that has happened in this world is Saudi Arabia, the Al Saud, turning against Wahhabism. A man who's being demonized in the Western press, the way my Prime Minister Narendra Modi is being demonized. The way Mohammed bin Salman has been demonized. Check my writing. From day one, I said, this man should not be demonized. He should be celebrated because he's moved away from Wahhabism. Look, Matt, when you're faced Wahhabis, when you come in contact with them, when they've drawn your blood, when they shot at you, you understand what it is. Khomeinis, frankly, I've never had a problem. I've never tangled with them. Syria or wherever, in any of the theaters I've gone to. But Wahhabis, yes, several times, 5 or 6 times. But, this is the situation we are talking about. And that is where our thinking is different. And Biden, people cannot forgive us for buying into that Ukrainian strategy, that Europe counts. It's the Atlantic that counts. And frankly, the India-US relationship is good, but it could be fantastic if you had more intelligent people, intelligent about the real world, serving the White House, the NSC, CIA possibly. These are the guys who have fed these delusions, Ukraine. And it's ridiculous. Taiwan is the democracy that's essential to the free world. Because believe me, if Taiwan falls, we are all in trouble in Asia, including Vietnam, by the way, a good friend of India, by the way. Indian Vietnamese soldiers, we have multiple drills together. We are very close to Vietnamese. We have been from Ho Chi Minh's time. Remember, we supported Ho Chi Minh. We supported unification of Vietnam. And we have been standing together with them. So, and the West, I can tell you, people will absolutely stop believing in the West if Taiwan falls. They will, the elites will fall over each other to jump to China as this thing. Because you destroyed the only power in Eurasia which together with India can suppress the CCP. If Russia and India come together, if the West allows that to happen, CCP is in trouble. Like you squeeze Mayor Howe of the KMT with two basically very dark blue people. A light blue guy was squeezed by two dark blue people. Russia and India squeezing PRC is going to be a sight to watch, except that it's not happening because of the strategic miscalculations of the Western world and his obsession with a war that was lost from February 24, 2022. Check my writings and podcast. I've said from that day, it's ridiculous to fight this war. It's a lost war. I think I remember saying it on your channel as well, long back. So please, don't tell me about Taiwan and Ukraine. It's a horror story. It's it's what's called a cautionary tale. It's not the great, we are going to be the next Ukraine. Nobody wants to be the next Ukraine who's outside an asylum. And no Taiwanese are one of the smartest people I've met. They're not delusional.
Well, thank you very much for joining us again, Professor. It's always great to get an Indian perspective on these important global events.
Thank you. And I'm really delighted. I want to say I'm honored to be invited by your channel. You three are doing a fantastic job of China Unscripted by the CCP, let me say. And I'm very certain there would have been multiple efforts to get at you, but you obviously resisted all those efforts. And believe me, 40% of Taiwan is exactly like you.
Even if the West is in decline, we are on the rise.
And finally, the West will rise again. But you'll need India and Russia and Taiwan for that. I'm sorry. Take care.
I always do like having Professor Nalapat on because, I think we have a problem in the U.S. where it's like we can only hear ideas and opinions that exactly align with what we already believe.
Or like if something isn't something you agree with, then like your back is automatically up, right? Like it kind of closes people off to like hearing a different opinion. And I think every time we have him on, I feel like, yes, my mind is like bending in new ways because he does have a very different perspective.
Yeah, and we don't have an opportunity to really hear that.
Right. Like none of our guests from the U.S. have ever said anything like, oh, well, maybe it's worth developing closer relations with Russia as a counter to
Or we're
CCP.
Good friends with the Taliban.
Yeah. I mean,
individual Taliban.
Individual Taliban.
Okay. But like, yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. It's like, it does force me at least to think about like, maybe there's other ways of looking at things
or just to see a different way of thinking. Even if you don't agree with that, even if you do think it's wrong, it's good to see these different ways of thinking, these different ways of looking at the world, because that is, I think he is right about many in Western institutions being stuck in Cold War 1.0. And that's because they don't challenge those worldviews by exposing themselves to different ideas.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a good point. And one of the things India is doing, and I wish we had time for this, but India has been on the front lines of Cold War II, 2.0 in a special way, which is that they basically banned a whole bunch of Chinese apps, including TikTok, because they see the CCP's role in the Cold War as being this kind of influence of the mind, this propaganda, right? The way that
I think he talked about that.
Yeah, but I mean, what he didn't mention was how far India has gone in stopping those things within the Indian borders, which I think is deserves praise for banning TikTok, for example. It does make it easier for India to deal with the CCP when they're not constantly inundated with TikTok shorts about how evil the West is.
Yeah, meanwhile, Joe Biden has a new TikTok account for his presidential run.
Oh, the politicians' TikTok accounts are always
So cringe.
just terrible.
But it's a good point because it's what the CCP uses to manipulate the minds of young Americans.
I mean, I don't want to say it's just TikTok, but it's also, Temu or Temu as their ads from the Super Bowl is.
Well, they had a new ad for this last Super Bowl. I think they ran it like 3 or 4 times. But it's the same thing. And what really upsets me about the Temu ad is they keep calling it Temu, but nobody calls it Temu. Everyone calls it Temu. That's my big problem. Oh, also they use slave labor in their supply chains.
Well, I mean,
those 2 things really bother me.
No, I mean, so does Nike.
Well, I think the thing is that it's going to be just I mean, I never thought I was going to have to defend Amazon or Walmart. Against the CCP, but this is kind of what they're doing, right? Anyway,
it causes strange bedfellows, India and Russia.
There you go.
Yeah, or the Taliban or Iran. India's got a lot of friends.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like these are strategic friendships in the way that Donald Trump kept getting nailed for saying things like he and Xi Jinping are friends or whatever, but then. Not really.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about oh yeah, Xi Jinping came over, we had the best chocolate cake, and meanwhile, when he is the exact moment when he is there, he has a missile strike in Syria. That's the kind of friendship.
Well, I mean, we can't speak for India, so
yeah. I'm just saying, as an example of in politics, what does friendship mean? But yeah, it is very interesting to the idea that there is this. We're in Cold War II. And there are plenty of people in power who are still fighting the first Cold War. And so, yeah, I would say that would be my challenge to the audience, is to expose themselves to ideas that make them uncomfortable. You can still disagree with them. You don't have to accept them. But it's important to, read things you disagree with.
I think it also is important because then you... how do you know you really think this way unless you kind of challenge that, right?
Yeah.
If the only thing you read or think about or talk to people who exactly agree with you, then it definitely, it's not just that us versus them thing that you were talking about when we first started about how you can't have a conversation with anyone unless they agree with you completely, but also maybe you don't know why you think about something a certain way.
Shelley, I absolutely agree with you.
I don't agree with you at all. I don't think we can be friends.
Shut up, Matt. I can't listen to you. Thank you for watching China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Chang.
And I'm Matt Gnesta.
We'll talk to you next time.